Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much. So hopefully this has brought a kind of good overview about what sustainability might mean in the kind of broadest sense. And I wondered if anyone has any questions from the audience that you might have for any of the panelists. Try not to be blinded.
To market products as being sustainable, what are the regulations? Are there any?
Are you talking about the question of greenwashing as to what, what it says on the tin?
Well, from a craft point of view, so you manufacture a product to sell and market, and if I was to put sustainably made, or although I tend to use sustainable as possible, which, is slightly different, but it's very difficult to actually find what any regulations or laws there are to being able to put that on, or if there's any, because I have found that when I have put sustainable as possible on, I put sustainable, and a lot of my competitors complained. So I have now put it to sustainable as possible on those pieces that have been made sustainably. I can't make everything sustainably. But are there any laws and regulations? What do I have to prove?
Does anyone have any advice, questions?
Can you turn on the yellow one? Okay. So I don't know exactly, but what I would recommend, advertising standards would be your kind of baseline, wouldn't it? About truthfulness, so it wouldn't, trading standards, exactly. So it feels like the best thing to do in that scenario is to be as transparent as possible. So as sustainable as possible, what does that mean? Does that mean that you use a green electricity supplier? Do you use recycled materials? Do you use I don't know. It would depend on what your practice is, and that might give you an opportunity to tell a story about how you make the work that you make too, and to back up that claim a little bit.
I think it also speaks to what you were saying earlier, Sue, about, when you're trying to repair things and you might need materials that are, come from China, is that we are part of a global supply chain. And, the work that we've been doing with Applied Arts Scotland and Closing the Loop group made that very evident. Craft makers trying to, so not everything, we can't all work in the way that Railwood Studio works when you have you're working with local ecosystems and local supply chains, and you can keep it very local and you can stick that label on. Not everyone has that option because, you might be working with electronics or, those things. But I think your point about transparency is a really good one. But I also think we have a role as creatives and as consumers to push back on that and actually demand transparency from the supply chain. We also have a role as a customer to kind of go, we don't know. We can't help solve that problem unless you tell us what where the materials come from. So we can't do everything, but we can ask the questions. I wonder if maybe you could say something about that from a kind of regulatory point of view, maybe not regulation, but the kind of maybe where the general trend is going in terms of.
I'm glad you said maybe not regulation, because I'm not going to dig myself into that one. The trend is definitely moving towards transparency around supply chains and tools to help map those. It's got a long way to go, though. We've now got a new member of the team who is specialising in circular economy entrepreneurship. So they might be of use, but we've also got the net zero team who are working just now on tools to help organizations and businesses in any sector map that sustainability piece, map that carbon reduction piece, but it's a work in progress.
Guessing that we've probably got almost down to net zero on our carbon emissions, and we are actually keeping records, daily records now, production records of energy use, to try and prove that.
Sorry, Inge, if you could get in touch with me afterwards, I'd love to hear more. It sounds like a brilliant case study as well. And Sam, I think, has got her, yeah?
It's a really interesting question that I think globally there's a movement with B Corp certification for global companies. That's a mark of quality in terms of sustainability and looks at measures of social impact, environmental impact, as well as the sustainability in the supply chain. And it's quite an interesting question. What does that mean for small businesses in a rural area? I mean, I think they're American, so they do have some guidance for SMEs. But it might be that in Scotland or in the south of Scotland, we want to start to think about how do we demonstrate our own measures
Definitely.
of sustainability so that our customers trust what we're doing to find ourselves.
B Corp is great, but it's still difficult to get.
Yeah.
And we've got very few B Corp certified businesses. I think the newest one in the south of Scotland going for that certification is the new Jackson distillery. And they're looking at that whole renewable energy, hydrogen, carbon reduction, circular economy as part of the distillery. But for smaller organisations, it's so much work. So I think the idea of doing something specific for the South is great, and we could pick that conversation up, Sam.
Just to comment on that, because I straddle corporate and creative, so I work in both areas. So one of the things that our auditors in my corporate role are asking for now, I mean, obviously this is a big company and large banks. So you need to have a trail, for example, for modern slavery. So I think even creative businesses, if they have a supply chain, you really do need to start thinking about how each stage of that works legally as well. You may get asked that. So worth thinking about.
Sorry, Helen, you were pointing, but I'm not quite sure what you were. Oh, question.
Hello, thank you. I understand the position of having a location and a product and an ability to lower down your usages and make everything more sustainable. But my question relates to sort of a project that scales up and down with freelancers. How is it acceptable to, okay, there's lots of elements within sustainability, but if in the carbon usage and everything else, to work out what that project's carbon footprint will be and then just offset with trees, or what is the kind of the common accepted method of making a project that is with freelancers and scalable, sustainable?
Shall I have a go? Well, I think the jury's out on a lot of these things. And I think, part of the big challenge we have collectively is trying to figure out what works and what work. And I think picking up on Sam's point, like B Corp, there's a clue in the name. Corps, they're corporations, they're organizations with deep pockets usually, and, HR departments and, dedicated staff to figure all this out. As a sole trader, that's much more difficult. So I think, to come back to your point, it's about transparency, and it's about, making sensible decisions that apply to your particular business. I had a good chat with somebody who specialises in trees, and I asked him about carbon offsetting. I said, are they not just a big scam? Which is, from where I'm sitting, is what it looks like. But he was adamant that working within that industry, said, no, they are genuinely accredited schemes that will, that you could buy into. Now, I can ask him as to which ones are worth investing in and which ones are not. But maybe a question to ask Alasdair here in Reelwood is, how does that work in relation to actually planting trees locally? Anyone who's been around the borders of lately will have seen the huge amount of felling that's been going on in the last year or so.
I think if you wanted it to be a local planting, as far as you would be best to get in contact with local woodland charities like Borders Forest Trust, who are doing tree planting every week, and it would be a case of I think they already do run a project where they where you can buy a certain number of trees effectively. But otherwise, the other schemes that I know of are more sort of on a national scale. You're not quite sure where the trees are getting planted. It just comes up. And you even get kind of brokers now as sort of almost the middlemen between the tree planters and the companies. And so the brokers kind of organize it all for you.
I would give a quick shout to reaching out to Creative Carbon Scotland, who have specific tools that they've built to help you do some of that accounting of your carbon impacts and look for spaces where you can make improvements and be accountable to where you are having those impacts, and do that as kind of specifically and in a detailed way that matters to the work that you're doing. As far as Creative Scotland is going, that's one of the things we're looking at as we kind of explore accountability for ourselves and for the funds that we're dispersing. But I can't tell you how we're going to do that yet because we don't know, because we haven't actually figured it out. But we work closely with Creative Carbon Scotland, and they're very much kind of expert in this space and understand different areas of creative practice and have great examples of good practice that you can learn from too.
I'll just say something very quickly, which is to acknowledge how hard it is. We're almost 2 years in, and we're only now getting to a point where we could actually think about carbon accounting. So I'm kind of writing all this down, but just sympathy for anyone running a small business, particularly in the early couple of years. Your focus tends to drift from that. So, but I've taken notes.
Hi, I'm Julie Perroni. I'm one of the councillors at Scottish Borders Councils, and I've got the portfolio for culture. So my question is slightly different. I'd like to know if you think there are any barriers of running a creative business or a creative company in the borders. That's the kind of first part of the question. And the second part is, what practical steps would you like to see the council take to helping those businesses, and particularly when we're in a cost of living crisis?
How long have you got? You're not leaving the room. Does anyone want to respond to that from the council?
Could I respond partially, Inge? Because I'm aware we have some creative, cultural capital expertise, but we're not, that's not the main area of our expertise. But we do have a large amount now and a growing amount of support for innovation, for startup, for that entrepreneurial pathway. And we do plan to offer that across any sector. So, we're working closely with colleagues at the council already, and we've found things are moving really well in the Scottish Borders. It's one of the most active areas for us to get that collaboration going. So if there are people that need support, do come and talk to us. Absolutely, Creative Scotland, of course. But if it's around that entrepreneurial startup piece, and from later this year, the scale-up piece, we should be able to help going forward too. I think the main thing we're seeing right across every industry sector just now is energy costs, and that's a really difficult one. I know the council has a small amount of crisis funding there, which is fantastic, but we know the scale of the energy crisis is beyond anything that we can tackle individually or even collaboratively in the south of Scotland. Highlight, Ettrick Yarn Dyers is an amazing company, critical in the textile supply chain, under huge pressure just now. And that's one we're trying to look at nationally, how we fix. So that's all from me.
I was thinking that maybe we could use the break, and maybe people could come up to you and kind of suggest yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to reiterate. I think it was a point that was brought up earlier that most creative businesses are very small. They're sole traders, and it's the fact that you, as a sole trader running a business, you have to do everything. Like, you have to do all your marketing, you have to do all your accounting, you have to do all your and your actual making or creating or whatever you're doing. Or your client relations. It's sort of, so you have to, anything that can help share some of those resources and procedures. Like, as I say, Real with Studios is a perfect solution for myself as a sole trader furniture maker, but any ways that the council can create shared resources and shared facilities for doing things is, to me, would help.
Great. We're going to come back to that this afternoon. Thanks for that.
Could I just ask a quick question? It's around that small size of creative industries. I mean, I've worked in and around the creative industries for the last 32 years in the south of Scotland. And, the previous enterprise company didn't want to support it. I used to send musicians there and they got no joy at all. And, I think that's the big challenge for you. And I wondered how you were going to meet it, because you've already mapped all these enterprises, and Alasdair's just made the case, and it's clear. I know that case. My husband's a painter, and, it's the challenge of doing it all and being a sole trader. It's a big job.
I don't have one simple answer. I wish I did. And I think, we're looking at each other nodding, recognizing absolutely that challenge. I think what we're trying to do, and why we've got a member of the team that's focused solely on creative and cultural economies, is because we know it's needed. We know there's a new shift needed in the sort of support that's available. Everybody's aware of the pressures on budgets and the cuts to budgets that, all of us are experiencing just now. We do work closely. I meet regularly with Ian at Creative Scotland, and our teams meet regularly. Collaboration, I think, is going to be critical in the way forward. So it's working more closely with Creative Scotland. It's working with other partners. The circular entrepreneurship post, I should have said, is co-funded with Zero Waste Scotland. So I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that. And we're going to be trying to provide a lot more, resources on the ground to go out and work with organisations as well. And I think, Alasdair, what you said is really interesting. Sam and I were nodding at each other thinking, we need to pick up that one afterwards as well.
So, Ashley, do you want to have the final comment, and then we'll break for tea?
So I would just, I think there's a real need for public sector to work together to support you. One of the kind of great things about the job that I do is that I get to see across all of the brilliant work that people do, but also you get to see where there are some shared challenges and where systems are letting people down, or, there's just gaps that people fall into. And as much as possible working together, with organizations across the public sector and across the third sector to try and address those. And that means working with local authorities very much too, I would say. Because the place bit of the 5 Ps is really crucial. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just have a really quick final plug that as I mentioned about the redevelopment project that we're in the process of planning, Real with Studios, but we're sort of we are in the planning sort of feasibility stages of, and we're really interested to hear from any other organisations or practitioners or people who think there may be some kind of relationship or a partnership or any kind of working together that could be possible in the future. We're interested in seeing what else we can create at Real with Studios. So come and talk to myself or Graham.